Hello, welcome to Module 2 videos, and this particular video is taking a look at an introduction to income statements, and what we'll be looking at is the example on page 43 to 49 of your Maze textbook. Now, the first thing you want to do is open up an Excel worksheet, and so I'll just switch over. So once you have an open blank worksheet, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at Elvis Products International, and the example that I'm looking at is the one on page 45 of your textbook. So what we're going to do is walk through in terms of how to start up an income statement. And what we're going to first do is, like many of our models, we're going to set up an input area. And so what I'm going to do is I'll just shade it light green, and I am going to put a bottom border on it. I will go to cell B2, and I am going to enter in input area just so that we know what this region is up above here. And I'm just going to leave it blank, and we'll add the variables later on. Now what I'm going to do is start my income statement, and with every income statement, they generally follow the same format where you want to have the name of the company. So in this case, Elvis Products International. I'll start in cell B7 there, a little bit below the input area. And then I'm going to put in the title income statement. And I'm going to put for the year ended December 31st. So as we have talked about before, income statements are about a period of time. So this is an income statement for an entire year, for the entire year of 2011. I am going to put just a bit of a separator here, and I'll do it all the way over to column G there, and I'm going to include a top and bottom border, and I'm going to just give it a shading just so it gives it a bit of distinction. You can see there. Okay, now the first thing I want to do is set up my titles properly so that they are centered over the range of cells that I have determined that I'm going to create my income statement within here. So I am going to take Elvis Products International, and I am going to highlight all of it. Now there are a few different things that I can do. I can just go up here and quickly just say merge and center, and that works really well. And as long as I don't have to be adding or subtracting columns later on, then it really doesn't pose too much of a problem. But if I'm going to be perhaps adding and subtracting, I might decide that I want to not merge and center, so I'll go up here and undo that. But perhaps what I want to do is something similar. It just doesn't merge the cells together. I'm going to select that range, and I'm going to right click and just say Format Cells. And I'm going to go to Alignment, and I'm going to change the horizontal alignment to Center Across Selection, and I'll click OK. So now it's centered it across the selection, but you can see it's still 6 different cells. Now I want to do the same thing with income statement and for the year ended, and actually perhaps I'll make this just I'll make this bold here. Oops. Click there. I'll make it bold. And what I want to do is I'm going to now change both of these titles so that they have the exact same format. So what I'll do is I'll select this Elvis Products International, and I can select the whole thing here, and I want to format the paintbrush or format the painter. So I'm going to basically click on Format Painter. Now what I have is a paintbrush tool, and it will allow me to paint the same format in the other 2 cells. or range of cells. So that's a handy function when you want to format something exactly the same way as another cell. You don't want to copy the contents, you just want to copy the format. So now I'm going to start to enter in the kinds of entries that you see in an income statement. So we always start off with our sales and revenue. So I'll start off here with sales, and I'm going to do it for the year 2011. I'll put it in this column here. And for the year 2011, I've got sales. Now those are the dollar amounts that I actually sold of my goods. So I'll enter these in as I go along. So that's 3,850,000 and 3 zeros there. Okay, so as we start to enter that in, I want to change the format of it. So I want to have the, I don't want to have dollar signs, but I would like to have the commas so that it's easier for me to see what that is. So I'm going to go up here and click the comma style button in the number group. So rather than hitting the accounting or the dollar symbol, I'm going to go up here to number, and oops, I am going to go to more number formats, and I want to use a comma style. So I am going to go down to custom, and you can see that I've got all these different custom formats, but I can enter in here that I want commas, and maybe this third one here, and we'll change this around and I'll hit OK. So now what has happened is that it has changed the format so that it has the commas. It doesn't have the dollar sign. If I were to go up to accounting or currency, it adds the dollar sign and the decimals. I want to go and I want to have the custom format, so I'm going to go to more number formats. I can go to custom, and if I go down here to this one right here where it doesn't have a dollar sign at the beginning of it, I'll click there and it'll just move back to the commas. So you want to play around with the different number formats. Now on here I just want to have it'll be left aligned, and I want to also include the cost of goods sold. Now another way of thinking of cost of goods sold is to think of it as your variable cost. So those things that are directly related to the production or the selling of the item. So if you weren't to produce the item, you wouldn't have the cost of goods sold. So these are the variable costs. And in this case, we've got 3,250,000. And I'm just going to format all of these just so that they're all along the left-hand side. Now, gross profit. Now, the gross profit is the difference between the sales and the cost of goods sold. So I'm going to want to actually subtract these. Before I do that, though, I'm going to paint the same number format. So this is the number format I want to use for this entire income statement. So I'm going to select that cell, click the painter, and I am now going to just paint all these cells here as the same number format. I am also going to just do that again, format the painter, and I'll do the same format all the way here. Okay, that should do in terms of formatting. Now the gross profit, I'm going to subtract these two. So I want to have a bottom border that shows that I'm doing a calculation, and I'm just going to enter in the actual calculation. So equals F11 minus F10, or sorry, F12. Okay, and I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger for us here. All right. Now I want to enter in, after my gross profit, I'm now going to subtract my other expenses. So I start with the fixed expenses, and I am going to put that value there. I've got 100,000 of fixed expenses. I also have selling and general and administrative expenses. And that was $330,300. And I've got my depreciation expense. So we talked about last class, depreciation is an expense that where we show our capital assets being expensed over a longer period of time. And we'll talk more about that in an upcoming video. So the depreciation expense is, in this case, $20,000. Okay, so now that I've got the depreciation expense here, and for some reason I've got the first two in bold, so I'm just going to take the bold off. And so with the depreciation expense, what I really want to do is I want to take the gross profit and I want to subtract the $100,000 and the $330,000 and the $20,000. So I'm going to put a line here to show that I'm going to be doing some sort of calculation. And this total here is called the earnings before interest and taxes. And you'll sometimes hear this referred to as EBIT. So in this cell, what formula do I want to put in here? I could say it's equal to F13 minus F14. Oops. Minus F15 minus F16. Okay, and that would work fine. I would come out with my 149,700. Now, there is another function that we can use to simplify this. So instead of subtracting these three values, another way to think of it is, and I'm going to just go back and take out the F14, 15, and 16. I'm going to go and I'm going to use the sum function, and I'm going to say take F13, which is your gross profit, and subtract the sum of the other expenses, like fixed expenses, selling and general admin, and depreciation. Close the bracket, and you will see you'll get the same output just using the sum formula. So the sum formula is really useful, and you'll want to use that from time to time. Now I'm going to enter in my interest expense. And when you take your EBIT and you subtract your interest expense of $76,000, once again I'm going to put a line there to show that I'm doing a calculation. And now I have earnings before just taxes, because now I've subtracted my interest off, and you'll sometimes hear that referred to as the EBT. I'm going to subtract it. F17 minus F18, enter. And so I've got now the last type of value that I need to think about is, or the last type of expense is my taxes. And so here I'm going to put taxes. Now, how much taxes do we have to subtract here? Well, the taxes are always based on your earnings before taxes, and it's a certain percentage. So in this case, rather than multiplying by a number and putting that in the formula here, this is where you use your input area, and you go up to the top, and I would put here tax rate, and in this case the tax rate that we are going to use, and I'm going to actually just tab over to D there so that we have an extra little bit of space, and I'm going to say 40%. And 40%. Oops. So I could do 0.4 here, and then what I'll do is I'll go up and I'll change it to a percentage format. Now down here in my taxes, I'm going to say this is equal to the earnings before taxes multiplied by the tax rate. So F19 times D4. when you enter this in, your taxes are now $29,000. You're going to subtract it, so I'm going to put a line showing that I'm doing a calculation. And at the very end, I'm going to say net income. And with net income, it's just the difference between the two. So I'm going to do the $73,000 minus the $29,480. And because this is the item that we're interested in finding out about, it's the last calculation, I am going to put a double underline there, which is not uncommon when you have net income or profit. So this is the value that you want people's eyes to focus on. And quite often too, is we'll make anything that is sort of the result of a calculation, I'm going to make cell F13, and I'm going to hold the control key down, and I'm also going to select these other cells of F17 and F19, and I'm also going to do net income. So these are the cells that we have calculated. Some of them are intermediate calculations along the way, some are the bigger calculations. And to make it match to what we have in the textbook, I'm going to make it bold, and I'm going to actually italicize it. So when we look at it here, we can see right away where our calculations are. One thing that you might notice is that you've got a little green tab here in this cell. If I click, it just says that I have an inconsistent formula, and the reason is because when I take a look here, everything else has been subtracted. This one's a multiplication, so it's just really asking you whether or not are you sure that's the formula you want in there. And so I can just say ignore, and it will make that go away. Now, what I want to do is I want to set this up for 2010. And doing this is extremely easy for 2010. I'm going to just highlight that range, and I'm going to copy it over. Okay? So one of the things that happens is that it tells me right away I don't have a wide enough column, so I'm going to double click and make it wider. Now the other thing that happens is that you'll notice it copies values over, and it copies all the formatting as well. So everything looks like it's been copied over fine. The only thing is when I take a look at cell G20, it doesn't have a number in there, and so I'm going to double click and see what's going on. So if I double click, it says I'm multiplying G19 times E4. So is that correct? Well, let's take a look up here. Well, that's why we're getting an error, is E4 doesn't even have a value in it. When I copied over the formulas, it moved from D4 over to E4 to get the tax rate. That's because we're using relative addressing. And relative addressing, when you copy formulas over, will move the formula with the cell. Now, I want to keep my tax rate firmly placed on D4. I don't want it moving as I copy this over from column G to column H, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, and I'll show you how to enter in an absolute reference. So in this cell, in cell F20, I'll double click on it. Now notice I have F19, which is the cell above, and I'm going to multiply it by the tax rate. Now this tax rate, I don't want it to ever change from D4. So what I will do is I will put dollar signs in front of the D and in front of the 4. Now when I place a dollar sign on D4, that in front of D, that means when I move columns, it will not change from column D. When I put a dollar sign in front of 4, if I copy the formula downwards, it's not going to move away from row 4. So in this case, I've got dollar signs in front of both. That just means it's never going to move away from D4, whether or not I copy the formula up or down, left or right. A shortcut to this, so I'll show you here. So we've got the dollar signs there. I'm going to go back to this, and I'm just going to enter it in with a slight shortcut. I'm going to say it's equal to F19 times D4. Now, just by clicking on the cell, I don't want to have to go back and type $signs. So if you are on the PC in the Microsoft version, you click on F4. And when you click F4 once, you put $signs in front of both the D and the 4. Click on it again. So now it's only going to stay locked on row 4. It'll move from column to column. We don't want that. Click again. Now the $sign's only in front of the D, so it will stay locked on column D, but it will move up and down if you've changed the formula by copying it downwards. And finally, it goes back to its original relative addressing. I want absolute addressing in front with the $signs in front of D and 4, so I hit F4 again. Now hit enter. You notice the calculation is done fine there. All I'm going to do now is, if I were to copy this formula over to the right, I will notice that the formula stays locked on D4. So I don't have a blank there anymore. But now what I need to do is enter in the values for 2011, because these are 2010 values. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to change my sales to 3,432,000. I'm going to change my cost of goods sold to 2,864,000, and I'm going to change my selling and G&A expenses to 240,000, and I'm going to change my depreciation to 18,900. Finally, my interest expense here is going to be 62,500 for 2010, and I should probably go up here and put 2010 so that we know what year we're dealing with. And if I take a look at the calculations, you'll see that all of this is done exactly how it was done for 2011, but now that we've changed the input variables, or the actual sales and expenses, everything calculates, and you should find that you have 87,960 as your net income for 2010. Okay, now the one last thing I want to do is, we've got all these numbers formatted in thousand. Well, there's the lowest number here is around 20,000 or 18,900. So it might get, sometimes when you have really large numbers, you might decide that you don't want to show all the extra zeros. And so sometimes in accounting you'll see an income statement that says in thousands of dollars. So I'm going to say in thousands, and I'll put $, space in thousands. Okay. So if I do that, now what I need to do is divide all these numbers by 1,000. But I don't really want to divide them by 1,000 and make them smaller. I just want to show them as smaller values. So I'm going to highlight this entire range. I'm going to go up to the number function again, and I'm going to change it. I'm going to go to my more number formats, and if I do my custom format here, this is the one that I had picked, and so in this case I've got, here we go, I just want a nice simple one. So if I do that there, okay, so that's the format that we had previously. Now what I want to do is I want to, oops, go back. I don't want it in the accounting. So if I were to go to my accounting here, let's say with the $signs, I can go and I can just modify this slightly. And so another way is to say I don't want a dollar symbol, and I don't want any decimals, and that would give me the same number format, but it doesn't divide by 1,000. I'm going to go to my more number formats. I'm going to go to custom, go to the format that we had before, and in this case I'm going to go. I'm going to get rid of all these extra ones. and it's not going to have any decimal places. So in this case, I want, anytime I have a dollar sign, that means any number will go in there. I put a comma there to show that I've got a comma appearing every 3 decimal places. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to divide by 1,000. And so the best way to do that without actually dividing by 1,000, but just showing that you're dividing by 1,000, is to put a comma at the end of it here. So I think if you take a look at, I'm just trying to, if you skip ahead to page 52, you'll see on 52 it gives you some samples. So if I wanted to have an actual, I don't want to have any zeros at the end, then I have those, just the dollar symbols. If I do want to have zeros, and if I'm dividing by 1,000, I might have, so if I have 44,220, I want it to say, 44.22 if you're dividing by 1,000. So I do want to have the decimals, and so I'm going to put my number format in as number, and I want to show that I have commas in between. So I'm going to put, comma, dollar or pound symbol. I want it to show decimals if there are decimals. And then the last thing I need to do is I need to show that I'm going to divide by 1,000. And so what I do is I put 1 comma. If I wanted to divide by 1,000,000, I'd put 2 commas, but my numbers aren't big enough. So I'm just going to do by 1 comma, and I'll click OK. Okay, so what we'll see here is that instead of 3,850,000, I will get 3,850 with 2 decimals. And so now we have, the numbers are still the same numbers inside. If you double click, you'll see up here that the number is still 3,850,000, but it has been changed in terms of its number format or display to be divided by 1,000. So once again, I'm going to go back up. We're going to go to custom number formatting. We can pick one of the ones that's here. I ended up just typing out my own. So I want a number, so this means if there's a number in front, then you put that number there. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a comma there. So it's only if there's a number that you would have that first comma. Then you have 2 other numbers. You always put a number before the decimal place, and we always want to have 2 decimals. So that's why you have the decimal 00. If we want it optional whether or not they show zeros, I would change this to number sign, and then it would only show numbers if there were decimal places. And you can see if I were to show it like this and divide by 1,000, then what will happen is that rather than showing decimal 00, it doesn't show those other zeros at the end, but it does have a decimal at the end. So you have to play around with these custom number formats to make sure you've got it working exactly how you want. So I'm going to put 0.00, and then I'm going to put 1 comma to divide by 1,000, and there we go. Okay, so play around with those number formats. It's a little bit tricky, but you'll find that it's very handy, especially when you don't really want to divide by 1,000. You just want to display it differently. So that's it for the income statement, and the next accounting statement that we're going to be looking at is the balance sheet.